Hey guys, thank you for tuning in to the inaugural episode of the Mountain Strong podcast. I'm Michael Krasinski. Quick background on me. I own a gym here in Salt Lake City. I've run this community for about 3.5 years. We train mostly skiers and climbers and hikers and cyclists, people who want to be better at outdoor athletes, hence the moniker Mountain Strong, and the gym name is Wasatch Fitness Academy. And it's been a really interesting year, and it has been a while since I've been in touch with a lot of people, and a lot of stuff has happened. Obviously, we're coming out of the pandemic, hopefully coming out of the pandemic soon. Hopefully most of us can be vaccinated very soon. And life is starting to change a little bit. My son is now 4 months old. We found out we were pregnant just as the pandemic was starting. And so it's been a really interesting experience kind of going through that, and really excited to take him out into the world and give him some new experiences. And over that time, I've also been doing a lot of research. I've been doing a lot of studying. I've been doing a lot of playing, and I've been doing a lot of testing. And that testing has both been on myself and with a lot of my clients and a lot of the athletes that we work with, both in Salt Lake City, but also honestly internationally, everywhere from like New Jersey to San Diego to San Francisco to North Carolina and to Germany. And so I wanted to share a couple of things with you that I have found to be incredibly important. And over the last year, I've actually dedicated a lot of my learning time less to endurance sports and more to strength training. I've gone through a couple of phases really of working on hypertrophy and learning how to and practicing the skills of building muscle mass. And for me, this was particularly because I've got a history of low back pain that seems to be connected to weakness in hamstrings and glutes. And as I've been able to add muscle there and bring those muscles up to make them stronger, my low back pain has basically dissipated. It's been a non-issue for the last really 6 months or so. And that's even with getting back into heavy deadlifting. So that's really exciting. And as I was if I'm going to do something, I'm going to also try to learn about it. So this is why it wasn't just about doing hypertrophy workouts, but it was also learning the mechanisms that relate to hypertrophy and learning really from some hypertrophy coaches about how to put that stuff in place. And of course, in the back of my head is always this question, well, how does this apply to the general folks that I want to work with, the general people that I coach, right? Runners and skiers and cyclists. Because for a runner to put on 10 pounds of muscle, that's expensive. That's 10 pounds more of muscle that you've got to take with you. With that same thing is true for mountaineering or for climbing especially, right? More weight means more effort. So there is a declining return on investment. So why study hypertrophy? Well, what I discovered was that there was a lot of really good ideas and language that comes from hypertrophy training that we can put into place for so many of the aspects of our life. And for me, it was really important to hear these messages delivered from somebody else. So up on screen right now, I've got a slide for you that I just built, and in Pages. This is not at all pretty, but hopefully it gets the idea across. And I want you to envision that you are trying to move from point A on the left to point B on the right. Your starting point, maybe it's, you've run a 7.5 hour 50K, maybe Antelope Island out here in Utah. Maybe you've had a history of knee pain, or your pulling strength for climbing is just not good enough, right? You don't have enough pulling strength to really demonstrate all the skill you could climbing. And you have a goal of an end point, or even we're just going to say, hey, a year from now, or 6 months from now, or 3 months from now, we're going to be looking at this end point where you either have a lot more pulling strength, your knees are really stable, and the knee pain has dissipated, or you have taken 45 minutes off of your 50K, which is it's actually a pretty impressive result over the course of 6 months or a year. So what does it take to get from point A to point B? Well, obviously we have to get better, right? Obviously we have to improve. The average of our performance has to be going up. And what I took from, and that's unquestionable, right? If you want to be a faster runner, you need to do the things that faster runners do. You need to practice running faster. You might need to consider why you're not a faster runner already and do some deficit analysis. Maybe it's form, maybe it's aerobic base. Maybe literally just practice, you just haven't put in the time training yet. Maybe you just don't train fast, you don't know how to. There's a lot of reasons why that could be the case, why we wouldn't have been successful with it. But we have to improve over time, and that's the way this happens. You don't just go from okay, this week it was a 7:30 50K, and in 6 months it's just gonna be a 6:45 because I want it to be. We know it doesn't work that way, right? So instead, we have to make progress over time. And when I work with people who are struggling to make progress, it is often that they are on a training fluctuation, let's say, that looks a lot like what's here, right? They start at their starting point, they get really super motivated, and they just crank the intensity way up. And then they kind of hit a wall, and they hit the wall and they back down a little bit. And then they crank it up again and they hit the wall again, and then they back it back down. And the two pieces here, these two labels of maximum recoverable volume and minimum effective volume, these are the ideas that have come from learning about hypertrophy training. It also applies to strength training, but I learned this in the context of muscle mass growth, is that there is a threshold at the very bottom, and it is if you do exactly that, you will make progress, right? If you do no more than the minimum, you will make progress. And that's what minimum means. I hope we can all agree. Minimum is what's the lowest amount of stuff you could do in order to make progress. And then at the top end of that, we have maximum recoverable volume, right? It is if you do this much, this is exactly what you can recover from, given the time that you have to sleep, given you the resources you have for food, given your training age, given your maybe chronological age, given your injury history. All of these things can play into your maximum recoverable volume. And we can assume that your maximum recoverable volume will probably go up over time, as does your minimum effective volume. When any one of us was, the first time you went climbing, like you didn't have to do a whole lot to get better at climbing. Like when you first started climbing, if you went climbing 30 minutes twice a week, like you'd get better. Maybe not very fast, but you'd start to get better. Well, if you're, Alex Puccio, you're not going to get any better off of 2 30-minute sessions a week, right? Like that just doesn't work anymore. At some point, what was a minimum is no longer, it's now even below the minimum, right? What was effective for Alex when she first started, is no longer effective. So the minimum increases just as the maximum does. But what happens is if we have a training cycle or a training strategy that looks like what's on screen right now, then every time we hit our maximum recoverable volume and we exceed it, it forces us to take some time off, right? And when we take time off, we often end up going below our minimum effective volume. In other words, we spend a little bit of time doing less than we need to do to continue to make progress, and we actually lose a little bit of progress, or we at least stall, and we waste some time. And it's interesting that people who love to run or climb or ski or bike tend to overdo it a little bit, right? There are plenty of runners that I know who spend way too much time working anaerobically, working above their aerobic threshold, and they struggle to make progress. And actually often doing a little bit less or working less hard is going to be a key to building some different structures in the body. Likewise, people I know who climb all the time and are dedicated climbers and love climbing, and what they can boulder becomes a part of their identity. Well, they tend to, again, push that maximum recoverable volume really, really hard, and then maybe crash and have to take a bunch of time off. And that's time that they could spend climbing, or at least making some progress, or at least going and climbing easy stuff and having some fun. So if this is what chronic overtraining looks like, a really good question would be, well then, what does it look like to do something else? And I'm going to offer you this other idea, which is consistent progress training. And you will notice, hopefully, a couple things about the curve, or about this graph rather. One is that the line between point A and point B is significantly straighter, right? It has fewer jagged edges. Now, in reality, there's lots and lots of little jagged points within a training plan. Like we're going to have good days, we're going to have bad days. Like, and that's totally fine. We're going to have weeks that we do a little more, weeks that we do it a little bit less. Like we get sick, or a kid gets sick, or like spouse needs us at home for some reason. We may put in a little bit less work, but overall we're making progress. But what's really important here is that in this case, the athlete has neither bumped into their lower barrier, right? They never dropped below their minimum effective volume, which means, really importantly, every single workout they're doing is moving them forward. And they also never bumped up against their maximum recoverable volume, which means that their body never forced them to take a rest day. Their body never forced them to take a week off. Now, every time we see that like little bit, it almost looks like a plateau, right? But the thing is, that's still some progress. And even if they had a little bit of a downward curve now and again, maybe because they got a little bit over fatigued and they need a slight deload, right? But they don't have to take time off. That's really, really different. So what I want you to get out of this is there's a huge value in taking easy days, and there's a huge value in easy work. And whenever we find ourselves kind of like bumping up against something and we're like, man, I'm doing everything I can think of to do and it's not working. Well, sometimes the answer is let's do a little bit less. And that's really my idea with consistent progress training. And this probably needs a catchier name. And in some ways, this is maybe even a self-evident idea, right? Like, man, the people who can run most of the year, the people who can ski most of the season, they tend to be the best skiers, the best runners, the best cyclists, the best climbers. Like, go figure, because they're putting in a lot of practice. But the problem is, guys, if we are putting in that practice above our maximum recoverable volume, if you are doing more than you can recover from, or if you're doing more at an intensity than you can recover from, we run into some really big problems. And all of a sudden you're taking a bunch of time off, you're getting hurt, you're getting injured, your mood goes to crap, your libido goes to crap, your appetite is bad, your work performance is bad, and everything else slips. But if we can actually stay within this range of consistent progress between MRV and MEV, maximum recoverable and minimum effective volumes, then we can keep that trajectory on the upwards, which is pretty cool. I also just want to add in, this is not just true for training. This is true for fat loss. This is true for learning a new skill. Probably 2 years ago, I decided the thing that I needed to do was, learn how to solve a Rubik's Cube. And I've gotten decent at it. My best solve is probably about 1 minute and 20 seconds, which is not bad for it's not bad for the method I use, but like there's more complex and advanced methods that require a lot of memorization. I haven't dove into that. People regularly like talk about being sub 15 seconds on one of these. I'm nowhere near there. I don't know that I ever will be. I think I'm okay with it. But like in the mission to learn this, the strategy that I used to learn this wasn't locking myself in a room and spending 20 hours on it. It was one step at a time, like learn a method, learn an algorithm to solve one piece of it, right? Just to get like the whole white side on the whole bottom side white, and then working the next layer and then working the top layer. And then all of a sudden I had it and I could like start working on getting faster. It's the same idea. Whatever you want to learn, whatever you want to change, yes, motivation can run really high and you can get really amped up to go super hard, but consistency is going to be the key. And like, yeah, if the person who's on screen right now, right, that idea, if that athlete pushed harder, if that athlete went closer to maximum recoverable volume, they may have been able to get to their end point faster and sooner. Right? Because they're actually well below maximum recoverable volume. They could do a whole lot more, right? And be okay. But I'll tell you, between this graph and the first one, where that first one has to take a whole bunch of time off and they're hitting the wall several times across that maybe 6-month period, man, I'm going to take the consistent every day, because then every workout can feel like a win, and like every week feels like a win on reflection, because there is always that progress to be made, as opposed to like, man, I absolutely crushed myself this week and it crushed me, which is just really no fun at all. I'm going to leave that there. Guys, again, thank you so much for tuning in to the first episode of the Mountain Strong podcast. There's a whole bunch more coming. I've got a whole bunch of episodes already recorded. Most of they're all right now interviews with other people, other coaches, members of my gym, some other people that I know, a couple of PTs who are phenomenal at their work. And I'm excited to share these with you. So please subscribe. If you enjoyed this, like it. If you don't, go ahead and leave me a comment and tell me what you'd like to hear about, and we'll get to it. If you need anything, feel free to reach out. Just leave me a comment and tell me how to get a hold of you, or shoot me an email or something. Have a wonderful day. See ya.